In tech matters, the future of bulk telephone metadata. The Obama administration says the National Security Agency will stop examining and ultimately destroy millions of American calling records collected under Section 215 of the Patriot Act. Joining me with the latest is Cindy Cohn, Executive Director of the Electronic Frontier Foundation. She joins us via Skype from Chicago. Cindy, in June, Congress passed a law ending that program. The public learned about it in 2013 after former NSA contractor Edward Snowden disclosed it to the press. A few days ago, the Director of National Intelligence issued a statement. Give us the basics of his announcement.
So the DNI said that he is going to stop collecting telephone records as of November 29th, 2015, which is 6 months after the law passed. That they're going to put them in kind of an intermediate place and not search them for 3 months so that their technicians can make sure things are moving smoothly. And then after 3 months, they're going to put them into something kind of like cold storage where they cannot get to them for ongoing use, but they're not going to destroy them until the civil lawsuits have resolved.
Now, there's an unknown here. DNI writes, separately, NSA remains under a continuing legal obligation to preserve its bulk 215 telephony metadata collection until civil litigation regarding the program is resolved or the relevant courts relieve NSA of such obligations. Cindy, DNI does not identify specific court cases. Were they brought by the Electronic Frontier Foundation? And in light of this announcement, will those cases be dropped?
3 of the cases that they're referring to were brought by the Electronic Frontier Foundation. And the problem here is that the government still doesn't want to admit that it collected anybody's telephone records. And until they agree that they did collect people's telephone records, specific people, including our clients, then they have to keep the evidence. Otherwise, we won't be able to continue with the case and determine whether what the government was doing was legal. So no, we're not going to be dropping the cases. And the government is keeping these records largely because of its own legal position and not because of us.
All right, so what happens on November 29th? How will the NSA obtain phone records?
Well, the NSA has to make targeted requests to the telephone companies using something called a selector. The exact definition of a selector is still a little vague, and many people are worried that they're going to read it very, very broadly and engage in still quite bulk collection. But theoretically, they're supposed to use an individual selector like somebody's email address and ask the telephone companies to give them information related to that email address, everyone who talks to that, I'm sorry, not email, telephone, that telephone number, everybody who talks to that telephone number, and everybody who talks to anybody who talks to that telephone number only. So it's still a lot of information that they're getting, but it's not the wholesale telephone records anymore.
Right. Cindy, before you go, I'd like to get your take on a related story. The White House just published a response to a petition on We the People, their online platform. Nearly 168,000 people asked President Obama to pardon Edward Snowden. Here's part of the White House response. Instead of constructively addressing these issues, Mr. Snowden's dangerous decision to steal and disclose classified information had severe consequences for the security of our country. Now, it suggests Snowden should have engaged in a constructive act of protest and that he should come home and be judged by a jury of his peers. Do you agree?
No, I don't. And I think it's very misleading. You know, first of all, Mr. Snowden did try to bring this up, and I've represented other whistleblowers who tried to bring this up through appropriate channels, and frankly, they really aren't available to somebody in Mr. Snowden's position. Similarly, the laws that he's being charged under, the Espionage Act, have very, very serious penalties, and they don't have any ability for the court to consider the public interest in what Mr. Snowden does. So, you know, if the government wants to clean up the laws and make them more reasonable for people like Mr. Snowden in the future, both to bring this information forward in the first instance and to face a reasonable balancing of penalties in the back, then we could talk about it. But I think they're trying to mislead the American people into thinking this is a simpler matter than it appears.
It's good to get your side of the story. Cindy Cohn, Executive Director of the Electronic Frontier Foundation. Thanks again, Cindy.
Thank you.